I, like many of you, started getting interested in this case because it was unsolved. I thought that if I studied it closely, read every book, used logic and common sense, I would be the one to definitely name the killer of Abby and Andrew Borden. With each new book I read, I allowed myself to be persuaded by the author to follow his or her theory to their conclusions. Some are easier to read than others, like Arnold Brown's book, or more literary, like Victoria Lincoln. Some read like modern true crime investigations, like Spearing, and some look at the legal aspects, like Pearson and Sullivan. Two of the authors were actually there, Edwin Porter and Arthur Phillips. But I was still not closer to the solution. I then read the trial transcripts, police witness statements, preliminary hearing, inquest, and while I was increasing my understanding, the identity of the perpetrator still eluded me. After 40 years of on-again, off-again study, I've decided I will never truly know the solution for sure, enough so I can prove it. And I'm okay with that. I have my suspicions, of course, but maybe, just maybe, you will be the one to finally determine, undeniably, that your solution to the case is the solution. In this episode, I want to give you some information about the tools you will need as you begin, continue, or complete your own investigation. The methods and practices I am sharing were not invented by me, but learned in my course of studies for my PhD and implemented through my years of investigation. I learned research methodologies in 3 areas for my degree: English, history, and theater. In addition, in my coursework for my MIS degree in digital libraries and over 8 years' experience as a reference librarian in a large metropolitan library system, I increased my mastery of source identification, which is really just a knowledge of who can you trust. I also learned how to search. It is my hope that by giving you this advice, you will be well on your way to being a serious researcher of the Borden case and its peripheral issues. Let's begin, shall we? Let's start with the sources, and then we'll move on to methods. There are 3 types of sources: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Seems pretty obvious so far, right? But let's talk about what they mean. Primary sources are first-hand works, the raw material of history, the original documents created at the time, and they include court transcripts, manuscripts, church records, newspapers, diaries, correspondence, archival records, and census records. Secondary sources were written after the fact with the benefit of hindsight. They are interpretations and commentary on primary sources, and they include biographies, histories, websites, newspapers again, and I'll tell you why, journal articles, reviews, law reviews, and criticism. Tertiary sources are summaries or condensed versions that refer back to primary and/or secondary sources. For instance, encyclopedias, abstracts, websites, handbooks, textbooks, bibliographies, chronologies, and almanacs. The thing about newspapers in the 19th century, you have to pay attention. There were multiple newspapers per city, multiple issues per day. Competition between papers led to a lack of fact-checking. They published gossip, and the stories were written like fiction. They were human interest stories. Because of this, you have to be wary of newspaper coverage of the Borden trial. They get stuff wrong all the time. And while newspapers are considered a primary source, in this case, because it happened in this era, in 1892, the 19th century, in the era of yellow journalism, you must be wary. Don't believe everything you could read in the newspapers. And in fact, according to Edgar Allan Poe, believe nothing you hear and only half of what you see. Now, where do you find primary sources? Which is an excellent question. LizzieAndrewBorden.com, Ancestry.com, the Fall River Historical Society, the Fall River Public Library, newspapers.com, and special collections at libraries and historical society. We'll go through each one so you know where's what. On lizzieandrewborden.com, which is free by the way, you can download and read the trial transcript of the Borden case, police witness statements, wills of Lizzie, Emma, and John Morse, and all primary sources are digital and searchable. Very important. The Fall River Historical Society. They have mill records, biographical files, city documents, maps and atlases, valuation records, city directories, and newspapers on microfilm, as well as the world's most premier Lizzie Borden collection. The trick to using the Historical Society is you should join. If you join the Historical Society for a very small amount of money, then you get discounts on research. Discounts for them to do the research for you, and discounts for you to go in and do the research for yourself. It's a place you'll have to visit and you'll have to use in your study of the case sometime. So join, support this great nonprofit in Fall River, and you'll get your money's worth, I promise you. So Ancestry.com. Very expensive. Census records, death records, city directories, genealogy information. Almost everything on Ancestry is great, except when you start to get into family genealogies, where families put their genealogical information on Ancestry. Lots of misinformation, lots of wrong dates, lots of incorrect connections between family, and it can be confounding. So you have to do your own research. You can't rely on somebody to say, this is that Abraham Borden, Andrew's father, because there were several in Fall River at the time. Even the Andrew Borden or Abby Durfee Gray, there are other people by that name that get confused. So do your own research when you get to this part of genealogy, and don't rely on other people's research in order to be accurate 100%, because it's not. Newspapers.com is a most wonderful site. You can search by state, date, topic, but it's limited dates in some cases, which I think has a lot to do with copyright. So, for instance, they have Fall River papers up to like 1923, which is interesting because that's the date, the last date when copyright law allowed things to be presented without incurring a copyright violation. So that's why newspapers.com is limited. But this is okay because our search is 1892, 1893, right? And that means that they're all there, including New York and Boston papers, which is really important. There are newspapers that are not on here that you wish were. The Providence Journal is not on newspapers.com, nor is the New Bedford Evening Standard. So the Fall River Public Library, great institution, it's free. They have death records on microfiche, obituary index, they have a Fall River room, and newspapers on microfilm. Great place. If you're going to come to the Historical Society, go there too. Special collections, personal archives, correspondence, diaries, manuscripts. So what I mean by special collections are, for instance, a person leaves their papers to an institution, perhaps the New York Public Library, perhaps a lawyer or someone from the case that went on to become someone, but beyond the case, leaves their papers to the institution in their hometown. Those papers are then collected and stored in that location. You have to do a search to find out where family papers are housed, whether they allow the public to access them, and you always have to have an appointment to visit them. You have to have a good reason to get your hands on them and to look through them. Once you establish a rapport with the collections librarian, you're pretty well good to go. You might be surprised at what you might find. Now, where do you find secondary sources? Your local library through interlibrary loan, local bookstore, Amazon, two antiquarian booksellers, abe.com and alibris.com. Of course, eBay. Been buying from there for a long time. That way you can build your own collection. So you have your own library. I want to make a point here that books about the case, which are secondary sources, so Arnold Brown is a secondary source. But trusted histories have source notes, footnotes, or endnotes to show you their sources. If a book doesn't have any, it cannot be completely trusted. And that's the problem we have with Arnold Brown's book, Lizzie Borden, The Truth, the Legend, the Final Chapter. There are no footnotes. There's this massive conspiracy that he details, but we don't know where he got the information from. We don't know how he found this out. And when you're done with the book, it feels invented. How to search Google seems like a really obvious thing because we do it all the time. However, it's not so obvious. For instance, on the left-hand side, you'll see the name Lizzie Borden. You enter Lizzie Borden, and 5,720,000 results come up. That was today. Enter Lizzie Borden in quotation marks, and 2,770,000 come up. Why the difference? It's the same name. The quotation marks make all the difference. You're asking for the phrase Lizzie Borden, not every instance of Lizzie and every instance of Borden, and maybe Lizzie Borden. So put your questions, put your search criteria in quotation marks, and you will limit the amount that you get back, but that limiting is more geared towards what you're after in the first place. In addition, ask experts or others who are interested in the case for their methodologies, but know their sources. And please don't be afraid to ask them how they know what they know or where they read it. You may find that it was from a disreputable source. And if they can't remember where they found it, it probably is from a newspaper or a book without a footnote. So you have to be careful where you get your information from in order to find it reliable. Well, there you go. That's my first episode of Mondo, Lizzie Borden. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.